beholder of an aspect ratio. That's all.
Yeah. You don't take full advantage of the IMAX.
Right. I'm not giving.
Actually, no. You're probably closer to the IMAX
Right.
ratio.
You're more 16:9.
I'm more 6'9". You're more IMAX. That's how it is. You should be much bigger, is what I'm getting at.
Can you make my square bigger?
Yeah. I think I can. Hold on. Let's see this. Let's see. What do we? Can I move you around? No, I can't. That sucks. Hold on.
Okay. It's not a problem.
I think it is, pal.
So I'm gonna have a new logo soon.
New logo than this? I might as well. I should take this off then if you're gonna have.
Well, no, I mean leave it up until I have a new one. But yeah, I'm having a whole new branding system made. A guy that I use to do all my design work. There you go. But
that's me though.
That's
the other way.
Hey, oh, hello.
There it is. Talk about your 16:9 versus IMAX. You're ready to have like 3 front rows, just like right up on you,
Yeah, I'm
seeing you.
Shawn right now.
8K detail, buddy.
King Kong Shawn.
All right, listen. I don't know how to make this go away now. This one? No. This one?
No, that's it. Oh, but look, you've reversed our order. Oh, okay.
I know what I'm doing here, pal. What's this one? Nope. 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 Here we are.
Yeah, just leave it at that. Run the damage.
There it is. Get out of here, Shawn. All right, what are we talking about? Let's go down the same sort. Let's talk about habits that both lead to poor these poor habits that you end up setting up because you're not even paying attention. Suddenly it just becomes that was really fascinating to me. I wish I could have remembered to go back when you said, hey, when I was in this headspace back in the day and I would just complain and go blah blah blah. I wanted to go back to that, but we kind of went down this path of, I'm just gonna hit the go button.
Hit the intro and then we'll get into it.
All right, I got 1, 2.
This is the INKPULP podcast.
Look at this, 2 days back to back. Can I tell you what my fear was?
What's your
I typically
fear,
don't
man?
change my shirt. Day to day. I am just a bum now.
Me too, dude.
You have
we recorded yesterday. I was like, "Oh shit, is this the same shirt from 2 days ago?"
Yeah, exactly. I was like thinking to myself, like, "Oh crap, I don't typically." First of all, most of the conference things that I do, I keep the camera off and I just chit chat. But rare am I ever compelled to be like, get out of my pajama shirt. I just go downstairs, draw, go back, go to sleep.
We're just sitting in the studio. It's not like we're sweating all day.
But also, you go to a studio. I mean, I have even less excuse. I literally go from my living room into my office space and be like, "What the hell?" So,
right, so I'm more of a pig than you because I leave the house in the same.
Oh, you leave the house? Yeah, no, you should not be in society. You are.
Well, look, here's my thing.
You're the kind. Are you the kind of person? Here's the cutoff for me. Do you go to the store wearing your pajama pants?
No, I don't wear my pajamas into the studio. I'll wear like a tank top. Like today, I'm wearing this tank top. And I'll wear it and I'll be like, I was only in it for like 8 hours in a studio and then I change and go to the gym. So I'm like, it's not really...
If I didn't know that you were Jewish, I'd say that you were Asian because that's basically what an Asian mom would say. It's like, no, don't put that in the laundry. There's no reason to wash it. You're only in it for like a couple hours. That's still technically clean.
That's my thinking. And it's because I don't want to have to do a ton of laundry.
Yeah. I can stretch this same shirt if I choose to. I can stretch this thing for like 4 or 5 days. 7 if I'm not thinking about it, but definitely
I'll wear it 2 days. Like that's it.
Oh, dude. No. You don't know the levels of my freaking laziness. I'll go 7 days and people are like, how many copies of that shirt do you have? And I'm all like, what do you mean? It's confusing to me. Why would I buy more than 1 copy of a shirt?
Some people do that. Some people have a uniform. Like,
no, I know it.
Seriously, like, I know it. T-shirt, blue jeans every day.
Dude, that's me. I have a V-neck, T-shirt
and dark jeans. I'm pretty sure that's you.
Yeah. I like that because I don't have to think about it, right? But there are also times when that saves me because people go, well, he does have that uniform. I wonder if he also has a uniform for his laziness. And I said, yeah, there is a uniform for it. My laziness is multi-pronged, is what I'm saying. It has a lot of different...
Laziness takes work.
Yeah. Laziness takes a lot of dedication and coordination. All right, what were we talking about? Oh, yeah, so that was freaking me out, just the idea of it as we signed on. Before we get any further, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We are almost 5 minutes into the 140th The only reason I got it is because we recorded one yesterday.
Right.
That's the only reason. If it went past 24 hours since we recorded, this would be the 179th or whatever the stupid thing I said.
Take the win. It's okay.
140th episode. Thank you everybody for being here. As you can see, we don't have Matteo Scalera again. He took some time for himself, as he should. He's a hardworking man. Listen, I bust his chops.
Video he sent. Did you see
what did he
that?
Do? Yeah, but that's well deserved. To give you guys context,
I'm happy for him, but
I'm not. I hope the ocean swallows him.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a friend sending you that.
That's a guy. He goes, "Hey guys, this takes a lot of hard work." I can't remember the caption, but I hated it. But jokes aside, he's a hardworking dude. He has been sort of keeping several plates spinning. By the way, I say this as if we're not doing it, but he's the one that gets to take it. We are all spinning a bunch of different plates. Matteo was smart enough to schedule it in his calendar to get away for a little bit with his family. He sent us a short little video of him panning along the cleanest, most beautiful beach.
Southern Italy, man.
That I'd seen in a long, long time. I don't know if he's losing his mind over there right now.
I don't know if he's in Naples. He might be in Naples.
I don't know if he likes Southern Italy, but from what I saw, no complaints from him.
That's
Matteo, buddy.
That's the one. That's the next one we have to figure out. Getting to the Amalfi Coast.
I agree, 100%. After we go to Barcelona,
after Spain,
after Spain.
So my thought is with Spain.
Yeah. Wait, hold on. Let me finish this thing.
Go ahead.
Matteo's not here, so we want to say, hey, buddy, we are glad that you're not here, not just because we can't stand your guts, but also because you're taking some time off for yourself. And in the meantime, as his stand-in, which is just as effective as him, is the INKPULP podcast logo. Which offline, just before I hit the live button, you said you're going to go through and rebrand and change it up a bit. So talk about that for a couple minutes.
All right. So I have a designer friend who I work with for all my design needs. I pay him to do everything from my lock screen, which I give away free with every newsletter, to any sort of print material I'm doing.
Cool.
He is laying out and designing my next book, blah, blah, blah. So he's in comics. He does comic stuff. But his background is in advertising and design.
Nice.
And marketing. So
nice.
He explained to me what a branding system is.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And right. I didn't know of this. So when a client hires him to do a branding system, first off, it's expensive as fuck.
Yeah, I know this. Yeah.
But it's amazing. What you're left with is a portfolio of logos in all sorts of renditions, all different aspect ratios. Like I've got the drip with the skull in it and the INKPULP podcast written that way. And I've got and he develops a palette, which I already have that pretty firmly established, my cyan, black and white.
Yeah.
But he gives you like, okay, well, let's say you're needing your logo on a black background. Here's your options for that. Your logo on this, or let's say you just need the icon of the logo. Here's options for that. And
right.
And it's all in vector, so you can make it whatever size you want. But it's pages and pages and pages of logo work. So we were talking one day, and he was like, "Hey, man, I don't want to like overstep, but because he's doing all my work, he's playing my logos all the time. He's like, I think I could spice up what you have."
Yeah.
And I was like, I've been thinking that I need that. Like when I look at the drip skull thing, it's a bit cold. And
what do you mean?
It's just.
Is it because it's a skull?
No. I like the skull. It's not. It doesn't have like my personality. Like it's not cartoony. I mean, it's simple.
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you freaking finally admitted that you're a cartoonish, like you're a cartoon personification of a human being.
Yeah, and my artwork too.
Yeah, I dig.
So I felt that, and he also was like talking about the typeface, how there were some areas in the logo where the kerning was off, and just due to the typeface itself, some limitations. So he developed a typeface for my logo and is doing a whole branding system.
Oh, so good.
And the new drip will be more cartoony and alive and representative of me and my brand.
Well, listen, Congratulations and good luck on that. What I think you're talking about is like an entire branding suite, right? Like they give you the entire portfolio of everything that you're talking about, you know, examples of his application and what context and so on. So that's really cool. I'm glad that you can reach into your back pocket and say, hey, that's worth it for my business and my brand. Let me go invest in it.
It's something I don't see a lot of in comics that, and he was, when he was pitching to me, he's like, you know, there's just not enough people in comics thinking like this. I think Scotty does it pretty well. His his logo and his typeface, it's all him, and it like just the way it's written, it's him. I don't know that he has the full branding system, but he does a good job of branding himself with his logos and stuff. But it's something I always like. I love great design work. I have books of logos. I love Ryan Hughes. He's one of my favorite designers, and his logo work is incredible. So I like having that. But I think a lot of us could benefit from it.
Yeah, I agree. If you have the means to, at the very least, even if you can't pay for it right now, look into it and what it means. I mean, if your friend is identifying that in comics they don't often do it, and if there's value of it for you, and I think it's really the most valuable. I don't know. It kind of ladders up or down depending on how you think about it. Like, if you understand that you are ultimately trying to go into a space of like branding yourself as an individual, independent of whatever project that you're working on. Let's use Scotty Young as an example. Scotty can exist independent of the covers and the projects that he's involved with. Fortunately, when you see Scotty Young's like branding, and you guys don't, some people don't even know what that means, right? Like once you see the branding of somebody, you kind of have an understanding of like, oh, I know who that belongs to immediately.
Yeah.
Right. And it's worth looking into, even if you can't afford it right now. It's also worth looking into investing in yourself as a brand, as an illustrator. Some people that might make their stomach turn when you hear that. But as an artist, I really think, especially in the space that we're in, I really think it's critical. I really think it's essential.
I totally agree.
Yeah. All right. So listen, thanks for MATTEO for leaving. So Shawn and I can actually talk about stuff without him like interrupting. And I'll say this, you know, as much as he's an annoyance, we miss him. We miss being able to have him along and having that really nice other side of the world lighting, you know?
Yeah, he always has that beautiful fucking lighting because
it's that studio. It's that studio of his. So all due respect. Can I talk about something else really quick? So some people have mentioned this, right? Can you see these little things on my glasses? See that? Some people have brought that up, like, you know, in my messages. They're like, Eric, what is that thing that when you're putting on your glasses, you loop it around your ears? I have a genetic disadvantage by way of my facial features. Most of these glasses, especially the ones that I'm wearing now, but generally most of these glasses are made to fit like the traditional standardized Anglo-Saxon sort of feature. People with your nose, Shawn.
Okay.
Right? The bridge of these, the pads or this area of these glasses are meant to sit on a person that actually has a bridge of a nose. I do not. I have like a ESPN fucking skateboard ramp. You know what I mean? Like an X Games fucking skateboard ramp of a nose. So that's number one. Number two, I have particularly oily skin. And you combine those two things, an area and by which these things are not designed for, and therefore there's no bridge for it to sit on, and oily skin. There are times when my glasses in the past would just slide all the way to the tip of my nose, and instead of like addressing it, instead of like maybe pushing it up or doing whatever the hell with it, I would just continuously like raise my face until the glasses were still in. I wasn't smart enough, you know?
So those things help keep it in place.
Yes, it took my wife to go like, what are you doing? And, you know, and I said, oh, it's just keeps slipping off. And she's like, buy these things instead. Now I could, when I'm buying these things, be at the optometrist and they adjust it for you as best as they can. And they have. It's not as if they haven't tried. But I'm telling you, they're working against my DNA. They're working against biology because as much as they want to bend these things back, you know, to curb around my ears and effectively be the clamp that keeps these things flush to my face.
Yeah.
It's a no-win situation for them. That's a fight not worth fighting, you know?
So they're not helping you?
No. If I were to have the optometrist, the technicians there, just that doesn't help very much.
I got you.
These do, because number one, there's silicon and they really do wrap around my ears. There's another version, and I can't remember the term of it, but you can actually look it up online. I'm not the only Asian on the planet that has these issues. So they actually have this thing called, it's a specific fit. They call it a low bridge, right?
Oh, okay.
And how they compensate, number one, is they move these things a little bit wider, like this.
Okay.
So that it sits a little bit more. And number two, they make the prongs here. I know these things, the glasses have anatomies. I don't know what these things are called, but whatever this is.
Arms.
They have it so that it, no, they're not. Are they arms? Anyway, so they have these stems, you know, like they round a little bit more and pin to the back a little bit more. I have a pair like that, right?
Yeah.
And I tried them on and they gave me a headache like you wouldn't believe.
I was just gonna say, does that like clasping just too much pressure?
They do, because if you want to talk about just like biology that's working against me, that class is made for like regular size heads. I must have put my mother through just birth hell, you know, on the way out. I must have like ripped apart as much.
Why? It seems like you're saying you have a narrow head.
No, I'm saying I have a huge head, because like those things are meant to hold on, like to wrap around. Mine is like gripping, like a weak grip from one of those little toy, you know what I mean? Like the little vending machines.
Yeah.
The claw. Yeah. So anyway, to answer people's questions, to know what those things are, they're silicon things that are fighting. They're doing their best to fight my biology of all my drawbacks as an Asian person. Yeah. So you're welcome. That was an extended explanation of what those are. Okay, so let's get to the thing that we were talking about before I hit the go button. Yeah. Which is we left off in talk. I jokingly said it, but I genuinely believe it's important. As I wanted to circle back on it when you mentioned it the other day, where you were saying in the beginning part of the pod, or the beginning version, the early versions of this podcast, was that you were getting the kinds of feedback that you were like, yeah, it helped sort of your echo chamber of sorts of like where your headspace was at. But after a while, you took a step back and you said like, wait this second, my echo chamber is really negative, right?
Yeah, I was holding myself in place. Like, yeah, I wasn't allowing myself to grow past.
Yeah, yeah. Let me by the way set up the thesis of what we're going to be talking about today, so that we can sort of like keep continually sort of repoint towards that North Star. I think I'm a huge proponent of, number one, setting up good habits, right?
Yeah.
And being in an environment in which if I don't have that habit, I have a point of reference to go like, that habit, I can use that. Not necessarily one-to-one, but definitely there's good and positive habits there. But the opposite can also have an adverse effect, which you're not even thinking about it.
Right.
But then suddenly you've surrounded yourself with things that potentially help inform on the habit that is going towards the negative now, you know? Yeah. And I think that's what you're hitting out at very early. So continue with that.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think about when it was probably about 2 years, right before COVID, I'd say.
Yeah.
The year before COVID was when I kind of it started maybe 2 years before COVID, where I started listening to self-help books that were just kind of opening up doors in my mind of thought.
Yeah.
And it was like maybe a year before COVID where I was like, oh man, I think I've been really depressed for a while.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And kind of stuck in it. And on a day-to-day basis, like depression doesn't mean you're just sad always.
Yeah, sure.
It's a much deeper, darker feeling. Mm-hmm. And you can have days where you're laughing and happy all day, but still you're in that depression. And so what got me out of it, or what got me to realize it, was I started with self-help books and meditation, and I always had this feeling inside of me of dread and anxiety.
Yeah.
And I mean, you remember those days of me being like that. And
you would text me all the time, I have this feeling of dread and anxiety. That was the name of your sketchbook.
Dread and anxiety.
3 years in a row. It was like Dread and Anxiety Volume 1, Dread and Anxiety Volume 2. And I was like, fuck, I think he's trying to tell me something.
Right. I got the volume 112. But I just I would wake up and get hit with it. And just one of the things that is a real strength I have, but also a real negative I have, is I just deal with shit and don't think about it.
Yeah.
So if like you are always great about taking a step back and analyzing a situation. Like we were talking about New York Comic Con.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know if I can afford to even do this, but I was like, I don't know if I can afford not to do this
Right.
because of some opportunities that might present themselves there.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a great ability to step back and say, here's what it's going to cost me. Here's what I average will make, and do a, like you call it, ROI, return on investment. Is it worth
Mm-hmm.
my time and money?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I am just like, I'll just go deal with it.
Yeah.
If something is like, if I have a pain in my shoulder, like I've had for years, a few years now, I'll just keep working out and be like,
Yeah.
oh, I can work through the pain.
Right.
So I do have this ability to just deal with shit.
Sure.
So I think this, like waking up with those feelings, it was just like in my head, I was like, you got work to do. You can't even worry about that. So I just lived that way for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
And through self-help books and meditation, and eventually I decided to get into microdosing as a therapy, microdosing mushrooms.
We are going to get
Now,
kicked off of this platform so fast. Okay, continue.
we can talk about this.
Don't do drugs, kids. You know, for those of you, don't do drugs. Don't be Shawn.
Some
Shawn's
drugs are
a
good. Some drugs are good. So I grew up loving hallucinogenics as a teenager. I
what a
love
fucking crazy statement.
it's true. It was my drug of choice, hallucinogenics. I
Holy
I
shit.
took mushrooms and acid regularly as a
I
teenager.
was gonna say, did you were a heavy LSD user, I suspect.
Yeah, LSD
Heavy.
more than mushrooms. I
Yeah.
yeah. There was my sophomore year at college. I
You don't
think
even remember.
no. You remember. You don't get blackouts on that shit.
Yeah.
I think we took acid every weekend at least once for that entire year.
All right.
Mushrooms preferred, but acid is like what was like $2 a hit
Yeah, sure.
versus mushrooms you'd spend $20 to get a trip through, which is fine. But mushrooms weren't as readily available as acid. It was easy to have little tabs of paper.
Okay,
Um,
so for contrast, right? Like I did 0% of that. I am such a, by comparison and contrast, I'm such a clean cut guy next to you guys. Every convention that we're into, I am just, there are points in the convention where I'm like, oh, it's 4 hours into this convention. And Jim and Shawn, there is just crack cocaine everywhere. There is
no,
just
no.
like everywhere we go, there is just fucking baggies, and I'm like, I don't know what's in that thing, but I got to prevent these guys from taking the torch and the spoon and putting it into their
Not,
arms.
I have to say, my mindset was I loved hallucinogens and weed. I
Yeah.
stayed away from anything that was an amphetamine. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
enjoy that feeling of
Mm-hmm.
elevating your heart rate. I didn't enjoy that hyper focus. I didn't enjoy the up. Uh,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't mind things that brought you down. I think I'm just
Yeah.
naturally wired a little up, like with
Oh
anxiety.
yeah, sure. I
So
just can't. I would be so like if it was somebody that gave you that stuff that made you go up, I'd be so upset with them.
I
Like you
did it
don't.
once. I did it once and
Yeah.
learned. I didn't do like.
You're
Um,
vibrating. I bet you were just
Yeah,
like
I
passing through
remember, like,
walls.
it was, like, 3 in the morning, and I was, like, watching TV, like, I was so into this horrible movie,
Yeah. Yeah.
just, like, really into it, and I was, like
Yeah.
I called my friend who took it with me, I was like, "Are you awake?" He's like, "Dude, I can't fucking sleep." I was like, "I
Yeah.
can't either, I don't like this." So,
Incredible.
just sweating and watching TV, not good. So, I was like, "Alright, I know what I like."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what I took. So, I started, um hearing about and researching studies on what microdosing mushrooms meant and
Mm-hmm.
what they're doing therapeutically with it.
Mhm.
And when I say they, I'm talking about the mental health doctor community.
Sure.
They have really had some amazing results with using microdosing to treat PTSD with soldiers, to treat depression, to treat
Mhm.
anxiety. And so
Mhm.
I read into it, like, how do you do it? How much do you do it? And like when I would take, for example, when I was like 20 and would eat mushrooms, I'd take like 2 grams.
Yeah.
Microdosing is 0.03 grams.
Mhm.
So it's a tiny, tiny little
Right.
dose.
Right.
And I was like, I hadn't done mushrooms in so long, but I got my hands on these microdoses. So I was like, all right, and I read that, it's take it one day, like let's say take it on a Monday,
Yeah.
go through your day. Tuesday, fine. Wednesday, you'll feel the shift.
Mm.
And so they were recommending it like on a every fourth day take it. Now
Okay.
I don't want to work on it. I don't want to be in my studio trying and they were saying you can work on it. It's such a small dose. But so what I did
Yeah.
was every Sunday I would go to the gym and work out and I would sit by the pool for a few hours. So I would do it on Sunday. So I did it every Sunday for 10 Sundays, which
Right.
was almost the summer.
Right.
And what
Now,
happened was
to be fair, that beginning part where you were saying, I'd go work out and go sit by the pool and microdose, right? You weren't at any of those places. That's just what was in your head. That's what you were hallucinating.
yeah,
You were actually
I don't have a
at,
studio.
at the You were actually at the local synagogue, and you
I'm
know
a
what I
rabbi.
mean.
I'm not an unbeliever.
All right, continue. Sorry.
So what I noticed happening was, let's say my baseline was here, a low baseline,
Yeah.
I'd wake up, normal day, I'd be down. Every week, that baseline went up a little
Yeah.
bit, and after
Yeah.
10 weeks, my baseline was happy.
Mm-hmm.
So my default was now happy. So and
Right.
what I learned is you've got these neuron pathways in your head. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're always thinking negative, you're creating, like, think of a wheat field
Yeah.
and you walk the same path every day, you wear down the wheat.
Yep.
And so you create this negative pathway that's just easier for your
Yes.
neurons to travel through.
Yes.
So just like a wheat field,
I wish we could send the article. I think I read the same one by you, or at the very least, list of articles
yeah,
that they did. They did research on that. Where they actually found, oh, wait a second, all of these
yep,
habits that you feel like are predetermined are something that actually you worked on until it became the easiest space
right, and
to your analogy, to walk through.
right.
Continue. Sorry, Shawn.
So, well, I think there's a special on Netflix called Fungus, Magic Fungus or Mystical Fungus, something like that. And it's
Yeah.
about mushrooms and how they can benefit us. And there's a portion of it developed to psychedelic mushrooms, and I think they do talk about the pathways on there.
Yeah.
So I learned that if you start thinking differently, you're walking up to the wheat field and choosing to go through the tall grass.
Sure.
But if you
Sure.
just keep doing that, you'll wear down a path, and that old
Mm-hmm.
path will start to grow over again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the mushrooms facilitated that. It took work on my end, also. It was like a vitamin boost for it. So I
Sure.
would meditate throughout the week, and I would catch bad thoughts as they were coming in and reverse the thinking. So, like, I think I
You'd be
just
like, "Get out of here, bad thoughts."
yeah.
You would yell at the bad thoughts like a crazy person,
But I mean, one of the
downtown
great
Seattle.
right? That was me for a little while.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things is one of the great tools I received was to recognize a thought is not a truth.
Mm.
So if I'm like you probably remember I used to be so down on my artwork,
Yeah.
and and I used to tell my things like, you're mediocre at best, Shawn. You've got a lot of
Mm.
work to do. And so it's just
Mm.
like catching that thought and being like, wait a minute, that's just a negative thought. It's not a truth.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then saying to yourself what seems to be more true,
Yeah.
and keep catching it and keep doing that. And over time, your default changes.
Right.
And those negative thoughts become fewer and far between. And you don't reach a point where you're like, hey, I'm cured, it's over. You have to continually stay on the path of doing the work.
Sure. Yeah.
So that podcast I was doing, you know, I think if you had asked me at the time, which you probably did, why are you doing this? It was like, well, I need to do something to raise awareness of me as an artist in this business. I'm already working 2 full-time jobs between SCAD and Marvel when I was exclusive over there. It's like, I can't do any more work than I'm doing. What can I do? And that's the time where like podcasts kind of were becoming a thing. That's when like Mark Maron blew up.
Sure.
And I was listening to a lot of comedian podcasts, Maron being one of them, and I was like, okay. It just got me thinking about the conversations you and I would have at the convention behind the table while we're working on commissions.
Yeah.
I was like, I can do this. I like talking to people. I like having like deep conversations, and I am not afraid to let personal stuff be out in public.
Sure.
So that was my noble justification for starting it. But I think what happened was I was desperately seeking, and now that I look back, I think in everything in life, really looking for approval or people to make me feel better than I was making myself feel. And now I'm learning where that all comes from, like the origin of that.
Yeah.
But so I just realized after a few years of doing it, and I do not regret that podcast. I think it was really good. I think I had some great interviews with people.
Yeah.
But the intro part where I would vent, a lot of people connected with it. But the problem is, I realized after time was I was down here and I was bringing people down here to connect with it. And then they're like, yeah, let's do more of this. Let's do more of this. And I was just there. And so when I started to wake up from it and was moving forward, I was still getting like DMs from people listening to older episodes, and the things they were saying to me, I was like, oh shit, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's when the podcast went on hiatus, because I was like, I have to rethink this, and I have to come up with what I'm doing. And then COVID hit, and then I was like, oh, I'll just record me and my buddies doing artwork and chatting. And I did that for a while. It really wasn't until you and I sat down and started recording, and then Matteo joined in, that I was like, now I see it. Now this podcast is full of great information and full of fun.
Yeah.
That's where I want it to be.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I mean, that's a lot all at once, all at the same time. But it's interesting to think about how the one that's really sort of like pinned at the front part of my mind of what you said was that, you had the opportunity there where you said, hey, I need to change something. And you were already starting to make those changes, right? You were already doing through, whether it be like psychological, chemical, pharmaceutical, I think it's more chemical, right? So like you were already starting to get to a place where you said you were reestablishing what your baseline was.
Right.
But things kept happening in your life that reflected where your baseline was previously.
Yes.
That's an interesting concept, because the reason why I bring it up is because my wife and I started on this show, the one with Jason Sudeikis in it. It's called Ted Lasso.
Yeah, I've heard of Ted. I have not watched it, but
you got to watch it. You got to really watch it. There's depending on the hype. And by the way, this has been out for like 3 years or whatever. There's so much hype.
Or Amazon. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's why I haven't watched it on that.
It's on Apple TV. I'm sure you'll find a wink way of being able to find it.
Yeah.
And so what was strange about it is because there's some shows that just get like all sorts of hype that when I end up watching it, I'm all like, okay, let's see what the hype is. Not that I buy into it 100%, but like I sit back and I watch it. I'm like, oh, I understand why this is popular. Really not for me. But Ted Lasso hit in a very different way, to the point where I started watching it at 8 p.m. or so. And I said, hey, I was hanging, it was my evening time with my wife. And I said, let's sit down and just chit chat a bit, get caught up with our day and watch the show. Well, my wife was like, well, it's 10 o'clock. I'm not, what am I in college? I'm going to go to sleep, So she goes through her morning. She has to, right? So if she doesn't get to bed by 10, she's basically destroyed the next morning. She's got kids, she's got chores, she's got the whole day.
Sure. I'm the same way. 10.
So she understands. I gotta start my routine 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10:30 at the latest. So I'm in bed and potentially passed out no later than 20 minutes after. So off she went, and I said, you know what? I'll catch up with you because I believe in that too. I'm like, hey, my mornings start at 4 a.m. I need to be able to be up and semi-rested by whatever so I can get my stuff done. But for whatever reason, this show hit so well with me that I didn't get to bed until 1:30 in the morning.
Whoa.
Right? And I really did pay for it this morning. I heard my son.
This was last night?
This was last night.
Wow.
And so I heard my son, typically he's up at 7 o'clock. Talk about patterns, right? Kids don't know that they're not supposed to be up at a certain time because so when they're up, they're just up, And so we have this little clock in his room where at 6:30, the ring, the face of the clock, there's a ring around it with like a little the animating face on the actual face of the clock, but the ring turns yellow, and that yellow basically means because before we got this clock, he'd be up at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah,
fucking banging on the door, screaming, "Dad!"
You know what I mean? Like have that. I didn't have that.
Yeah, I know. He'd just be banging on the door, like, "What the hell are you doing?" So now we kind of set it up for the past year and a half. Hey, when this thing turns yellow, it means you can turn on the light in your room and putz around and blah blah blah. And then when this thing turns green, that's when I'll come and get you. So it typically turns yellow around 6:30. It gives him 30 minutes to kind of, be in his room, just play with his toys or whatever it is, read his book or, whatever it is that he likes to do, destroy his closet, which I need to put together almost every other day. By the way, that's like a weird personality thing with me where I'm like, I need to have my space orderly, or I need to have my surrounding space orderly. My internal space, it's something in my immediate space doesn't have to because my office can get turned into a mess. But if I leave a messy office and go into a messy house, boy, it drives me nuts. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm in touch with that.
So, at 7 o'clock, then the thing turns green and that's when I can get him. And it just happens to be that 7 o'clock rolls around this morning and it felt like 5:30. I was so exhausted because of the fact that I stayed up at 1:30. That might be laughable to a lot of the artists that are out there who are up at some ungodly hour and they're not getting to bed until 9 a.m. But for me, I have my routine, I have my regimen, and I don't like breaking outside of it or else I end up feeling like the way I do today. But going back to Ted Lasso, the reason why it hits so well for me, is because the main character, it's a cast of characters, by the way, and they're amazing, is that this guy, played by Jason Sudeikis, I think I'm saying his name correctly.
Yeah, I think so.
He's not the way his character is written, he's not a fake optimist. He just has a more optimistic outlook on his conduct.
Okay.
To the point where people are taking advantage of it because he just thinks of it as like, hey, this is just, he's not dumb. He's not like, a level of awkward optimism like a Forrest Gump where he exists in the world and he doesn't quite have an understanding of like taking cues from people. This guy's incredibly smart, sharp as a tack. He just chooses to not go down the negative path. He can, right? Obviously he's very human. There's instances there where I'm watching what as he's being written as a character, I'm all like, yeah, that's probably a little bit to the right of his character when it comes to that optimism. But it never breaks a space where you go like, oh, he's a full-on dick,
Right.
And I think the reason why that sort of approach to writing characters, writing people, is because, and I read a couple of interviews afterward, or this morning, where it's won a ton of Golden Globes,
Yeah.
And a lot of the people who are involved with the show, including most specifically the writing staff, were interviewed, and they said like, there's so much stuff out there that is clearly intended to be divisive, focused on how to make everything overly simplistically black and white because it needs you to be outraged by that thing.
Dude, first off, that's the news.
Yeah, exactly. But then that just cascades into stuff, right? There may be a central sort of like where the pebble fell in the pond, and then all the rippling things come out of that. And now people just adopt that overly simplistic outlook that tends towards the negative. Now it's to your analogy earlier, this wheat field, people have programmed you to consistently go down negative, and you don't even know that it's negative, because the way you're programmed, it's meant to be a positive thing, but it's a weaponized positivity,
Right.
So when I'm watching this show, and after reading the interviews with the writers, and I'm watching each of the characters, and by the way, there's instances in which a lot of these guys can't necessarily be considered protagonists or antagonists, or just like main cast, secondary cast, and tertiary cast, right? Like they all have their failings, they all have their dings as being people, but I think that's what it makes it so much more appealing. I don't even want to say relatable, but appealing, because in a sea of like all of these shows that have a tendency to be a little bit more like not negative, but you know what I mean? Like they present this like I want to think of like a show like Barry gets a lot of hype. Like Barry is so well written. That's the one by who's the former SNL cast member that's on there?
That's Bill Hader's show.
Bill Hader's show. Like when you read it, it's really, really well written. But if you think about the character itself, you're like, that's like a freaking assassin, like there's a murderer.
It's a dark
it
show.
Is. Yeah, it's meant to be.
Everyone in that show is a mess.
Right.
Awful,
it's meant to be. It's meant to be, though. And it says something that as awful as that is, it's still well written. You know what I mean?
It's really well written.
But Lasso is not like that.
Yeah, I like this.
Lasso is coming from a place of like this guy, and he actually said it. He said it in the midst of the show, where the winning and the losing on the field don't really matter to. By the way, his assistant coach pushes back on him on this later on, which is a really great scene that they wrote. But he's like, the winning and losing of it doesn't really mean that much to him as a coach. What means more to him is the fact that he's out there being able to help these guys, these professional athletes, deal with stuff on the field and come together as a collective. But those teachings can potentially help them when they're off the field as well. I'm like, this piece of shit. You know what I mean? Like, like there is every opportunity, especially because it's currently in the zeitgeist of what's acceptable for writing, to go down that path. But they don't. They actively don't do it,
Right. I think we are at a place creatively where art that offers hope is not looked at as complicated or as interesting or like I just feel like it's like the Frank Miller thing. Like comics were all kind of hope, and Frank came in with a darkness and a grittiness that we as kids really enjoyed. But I also think it's a very hard thing to do. Like people are so saccharine when they write stories of hope. Like that shit I hate.
Let me add to that.
Sweet hope.
Let me add to that. I don't think that fairly captures what Frank Miller does, and I think that's what, especially with Dark Knight. Are we talking about specifically Dark Knight, or just like generally with like Sin City and
just generally? And I don't mean he's all dark, but and I'm not saying he's at fault for this. I'm just saying like, comics were very like saccharine. Almost.
Yeah, sure.
And Frank came in with some reality and put some life in it that we hadn't read before. That's what I
mean. Let me add to that, and I think it's this is where people don't quite understand why Frank Miller's stuff works, and a lot of the people who are influenced by Frank Miller's stuff seems to come off as like a really mediocre sort of like pastiche of the stuff that he does. Right.
Mediocre is being generous, but okay.
And and I think it's because of that word that you said, which is hope, right? And I think when comics work, especially the kind of comics that he's saying, the kind of stories that he's telling, when comics work, even if it starts off with a super bleak message, right? There is always hope, right? There is always and in some cases, in the cases that I really sort of gravitate to, the hope always comes in the form of a solve, right? Like there's always an answer that's presented against all of that daunting, overwhelming dread that's being presented in story sense. Whether, like, I think that's the reason why I like Chris Claremont comics so much. He sets up like all of these things that come off as really depressing and really dour, and that's the point. Is because he's a good enough writer. He's a great writer.
Yeah.
So by way of comic sense, at least in the formative years of my comic reading experience, that he presents all of these things that are happen to be awful people, and yeah, they will cross a noble, the theoretical noble, and like, what's the word I'm looking for here, Shawn? Like a line of, like they have this personality where you go like, that's really awful, right?
Right.
But they at the end they present something that's aspirational.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally.
They're not necessarily achieving it, but they're presenting a version of aspirational that makes you go like, I get it. That character is fighting against themselves, right? Or fighting against this situation, which is daunting, overwhelming, like an onslaught of just like either physicality, or in the case of like, the X-Men, psychological warfare because of their superpowers or whatever it is, right? But at the end of it, they always present a solution.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's internal, something that they go like, I know I need to fix that within myself, or external, and oftentimes with the concept of a team, right? Like I am failed. I am unpolished as a singular person, but thank goodness I'm on this team that helps rise me up. And it's not it's not uniquely to each, to one X-Men. Sometimes, depending on the storyline, it switches over to the next character, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Ted Lasso has a version of that.
Okay.
Right? Where he himself is, he's imperfect as any human is, but he chooses not to live in that version of himself, which he could completely compound as far as how imperfect a human can be.
Yeah.
And he chooses outside of that. It's a choice for him, and as a matter of fact, it's it's no spoiler, but like he's having marriage troubles, and there's a reason why he left the United States as a former football coach for a college team to go take on a Premier League team, which he has 0% experience in. It's because he was trying to run away from, he's trying to get away from this version of his life that presented him with an answer that he might not be prepared to deal with, So he goes someplace else, But at the end of the day, how he conducts himself on a day-to-day is still a person who chooses a path of positivity.
Yeah,
and so after the first 3 episodes, I turned to my wife and I was like, I'm in, but this piece of shit guy, and I said it like lovingly in a high level of admiration. It made me go like, I understand why this show can be, like the word that you use was saccharine, right? Depending on who's watching it, like I understand why this is off-putting, because he's not flawed enough.
Right.
And people have been conditioned in recent times, in the past 5 years, to really rally against flawed people because it makes them feel better about themselves.
Right.
Being with flawed people rather than aspiring and associating themselves with people who establish themselves as like, oh wow, that's really super aspirational, rather than like, I don't know what this is. Like there is a whole section of current society that looks at somebody who, and Mr. Beast comes to mind. I don't know if you heard any of this stuff, where the guy he's a YouTube personality, and his following is in the millions, right? And he takes some of those nuances of being a YouTube personality, and he tries to do what he can, right, to either volunteer money or give people who don't have any eyesight at all, give them the operation that will allow them to see again. He does all sorts of things like that. But regardless of where he is, people will take a pessimistic attitude about that. And by the way, you're at liberty to take whatever attitude that you have, but I don't know if they're aware that they're doing it,
Sure.
Of like, so this guy who's taking this altruistic position of giving their sight back, of giving back to a community, of like buying houses for his entire staff down the block. Oh yeah, so he's gonna like make a show out of it. He's gonna make episodes out of it and put it on his YouTube channel. And you're like, that's how he can afford to pay for that shit, you dummies.
Exactly.
They're like, well, if he's really altruistic, why does he have to make an episode out of it? And you're like,
Steph and I had this conversation last night. The same thing where someone did something nice for a homeless person on social media, and it was a beautiful story. They got them a hotel room for like 4 nights and showered and fed them and got them into job interviews, and this person's life was changed because of it. And then there's just people like, you're just doing this for social media likes. It's like, what? The impact this person had on that person's life is dramatic. Who cares?
But here's the thing. I don't think there's anything abnormal about somebody going in there and like, you're just doing this for social media clicks. But that individual chose or is, preconditioned to choose to take the pessimistic perspective of that thing that's happening. Whereas you and I can look at that and be like, oh, that's freaking amazing. That guy,
now that used to be me.
Right. Found this individual who had less opportunity than, a lot of the people out there. And now this guy, he's helping him out the best as he possibly can. I look at that and be like, hey, let's celebrate that. Let's be amazing.
Right.
There's a section of society that looks at that and be like, I'm going to take the pessimistic attitude and be like, why the hell are you, look at you just taking advantage of this guy and using it for your YouTube and blah, blah, blah. This character, Ted Lasso, could do that.
Right.
But he chooses not to. Right. And there's plenty of people on them. What's great about that is that he's a soccer coach or, overseas football coach. Right. He's a football manager, and his team that he runs are all populated with individuals who are the by way of attitude and perspective, or the cartoonized, really, really sort of like distilled version of what we're talking about right now, who take a more pessimistic attitude towards them. But slowly and surely, especially in the first season, they're starting to understand, wait, this guy isn't doing this to put this on. As a matter of fact, they invited a writer who understands his shortcomings as a coach, to follow him for a day. And he's like, again, taking that more pessimistic attitude. Oh, it's interesting how on the day that I'm doing this interview with you, this sort of like expose on you, we go to a kid's school, like you almost want to show off the fact that you're giving back to the community, and he's like, I think the attitude was, if not word for word, not verbatim, but he's like, yeah, I'm giving back. I'm not sure that I'm doing, it just happens to be that you're here, it's not because you're here,
Right.
And as a matter of fact, when he goes, it doesn't even go well, right? Everybody's fucking making fun of him because he's such an awful soccer coach. So it's not as if it was staged or anything. It wasn't as if he was putting it onto an audience that will help best shine the best light on him. He just does it. And I think there's a conditioning that happens in our lives that makes you go like, that's really awful. I'm going to take a pessimistic attitude towards that. And comics is not immune to that.
Yeah. Sure.
And I think as we're moving into this creator-owned space, right, as we do more stuff for us, and I can't remember who was talking about this 3 nights ago, where they're talking about this quote unquote community. And that's what really bothers the hell out of me. When they're like, oh, there's this professional comic book community where behind your back, they will tear you down. They will say everything they can that's awful. Yeah. It's not at all conducive to helping. And by the way, there's a difference between like staying silent, right? Being negative, and just being like, knock that off. Being actively, not because you're putting it on, but because you're like, why are you doing that? That's not necessary to do that.
Right.
I think it's a lot easier to go negative. Takes less muscle to just get along and not say anything, And then, but it also takes a different kind of engagement to be respectful of the individual saying that thing you disagree with, and saying like, that's not really worth getting into, right? And then there's the overly saccharine version that you're talking about, where they're just like nice and it comes off as fake,
Well, there's those people that just act so sweet and friendly, and they're just, then the minute you're gone, they're
for sure
awful human beings. That's a lot of comics people I've come to know.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it's built into their job that they expect to, and you almost kind of have to admire them, because at the very least they're trying to live up to whatever, yeah, whatever cutout is meant to be as far as like leadership is concerned, you know, it always seems like it's strained. And if once you've been trained to have your radar up for it, you kind of know when it's genuine and when it's not, because we've run into a handful of amazingly genuine people, right? Who are genuinely like in their genuineness, you know, they're not being jerks about a lot of different things, you know? So like, and as much as I bust your guys' chops about everything, it's all put on, you know, it's all
Yeah,
for
yeah.
like,
Oh, yeah. We're just
let's laugh about it. Let's make
yeah,
sure. And it makes for, good sort of like, it makes for a good 60 minutes of us having back and forth and just
yeah. And
bombing on each other.
it's a dance that friends do, banter.
Yeah.
It's fun to talk shit to each other, knowing it's coming. It's not serious, and it's all love. Like we're just
Yeah,
having
for sure.
fun.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting to think about that, you know, depending on where you're at, how you're preconditioned, you will surround yourself with that echo chamber that helps to stand up that precondition. And the thing that I suggest to that is find a way. I don't know what got you through it or what happened in your life. Was it purposeful? Was it something that you decided to get in? You decided to say, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore. Or maybe even it's a combination of like that decision making, that active, like, let me take a moment to like reflect on this thing and on my conduct and my overall attitude and how I am in
Are
the
you talking
world,
about me specifically?
just generally, but maybe you specifically.
Me
But sometimes like,
specifically, I can
yeah,
say
yeah,
it
go.
took me like constantly feeling like my life is not at all where I want it to be
Hmm.
and blaming it on all these exterior forces. It took me to be like, wait a minute, what role are you playing in this and
Yeah,
what can you change?
yeah,
And
yeah.
hitting that spot was like, oh shit, I can change a lot.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Even like, you know, the outcome might not be changeable because it happened maybe 3 years ago. And that's, you know, the baggage that you claim that you're holding on to that, right? Of that outcome. Man, that really fucking sucks X, Y, and Z, right? Because of these reasons, X, Y, and Z. But there's also a version, and you're not sugarcoating it because I think that's what people hear sometimes where you're like, I think you can take a different position on how that outcome played itself out. And
Hmm.
when I say like, hey, you can take a more positive position on that, they're like, what are you talking about? Just like, you know, fool yourself into thinking. I go, no, I don't
Yeah,
think that's what
no,
I'm getting at.
no.
What I'm
It's
what I'm
hard.
getting at,
It's
yeah, go
hard
ahead.
to, you know, it was a few things. It's hard. It was hard for me to be. I had been in such a dark place for so long. Like I just looked at positivity as like, oh, you're lying to yourself.
Yeah,
Reality
sure.
sucks.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
it's
Right.
realizing that, oh, that attitude that reality sucks helps manifest and attract sucky shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that shifting your mind. I mean, if you look at someone like, we keep using Scotty as an example, but if you look at someone like Scotty, the dude can't help but just project joy and
Sure.
positivity, even when he's
Sure.
going through hard times, which Scotty's a
Absolutely.
human
And
being.
we've been there for a handful of it. Offline, you know, behind
Yeah,
the scenes. He's going through
absolutely.
some stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Scotty's going through shit, but he always is it is a beacon of positive energy.
Right.
And because of that, he attracts a lot of greatness to him
For
and
sure.
and he makes, like I always say, I think what makes Scotty's work so popular is it just exudes joy and that
Yeah.
attracts a lot of people to it.
Right. Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. And just, yeah, I mean, just your overall content. Let me go back to the point that I was making, which
Hmm.
was,
Hmm.
you know, there is a way in which you can start reprogram. If you are one of those people and you've identified this is coming off as completely offensive to you because, you know, they're similar to you back in the day where you're like, oh, that's put on, you know, the world sucks, you know? And it's like, let's take that one. That's really cartoonish, but let's take that point. The world sucks and everything is unfair, right?
Hmm.
Now what? If we both agree, you trending more to the negative and pessimistic, me trending more towards the positive and, you know, um uh what is the positive, what is the opposite of pessimistic? It just jumped out of my head.
Optimistic.
Optimistic, right? Optimism. You can tell I'm putting this on. This is fake. I can't remember the word fucking, I can't remember the word optimism. So,
I can
you
see.
know, you take that position of pessimism, I take the position of optimism, right? We both agree that the world sucks and it's unfair, right? I have a different way of conducting myself as soon as we hit that truth, as soon as we hit that fork in the road, right? And I believe, okay, so if I can't change that because that's an internal factor, I can change how I conduct myself in it.
Right.
That already immediately to me seems like a more progressive step in a world of like unfairness and it sucks.
Yeah.
I can't change that. We like
No, I think it's important to accept that.
Right. What of that is within my sphere of influence, as I like to say? What of that is like, what is changeable to that? If there is something, I better identify it and do something,
And
right? Go do something about it.
That's exactly what I said happened.
Right.
Like, what role am I playing in all
Right.
this negativity?
Right. But if not, if what I'm identifying is a bunch of it is like, that sucks and I can't do anything about it, but I can do something about how my personal conduct.
Exactly.
I do have a control over outcomes that I do have influence over. So let me go focus on that. Whereas the other way, I think, and I've heard a handful of people, one that used to be very close to me, that was like, things are unfair, things suck, and I can't do anything about it. And I'll just continue to make it unfair. Or I'll just continue to like live in that unfair world and not really have a plan of how to get out there. Therefore, because it's easier to default into number one, that programming, right?
Right.
And then the excuse making at the end of the day when nothing works out. It's really easy to get into that space of like, well, go ahead, Shawn.
It also takes, for me, it took educating myself in the opposite way of thinking, because I wasn't even aware of a lot of the ideas and concepts of the other side.
Yeah.
And the other way of looking at things. So it's easy and it was a default, but it was learning and educating myself into the how to be positive and think differently and all that. Because it's like with my kids, like when they get really down, the attitude is, well, what, just by thinking differently I'm going to be happy? And it's like, happiness is a choice. And when I was in a dark place and I was down, I was like, no, happiness isn't a choice. Happiness is because things are going well and you feel good. But no.
Yeah.
So
I wish we could, before we start these conversations, I wish there was a bunch of like audiobooks that we could recommend to people, because I know a handful of them that are in my Audible account right now where I go like, oh, I need to that's worth listening to.
Send me some names and I'll do the same. And in the description of this show, I'll put the names of books.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I know a handful of people in the past have pushed back on the idea that happiness is a choice. And I'm like, I think that's obviously the fortune cookie version of an attitude, right? But it really does start from like, how am I going to, what is my reaction to that? I can control. There's more often than not, I can't say 100%, because sometimes some things are just like, whatever, knee-jerk reaction into something. Somebody hits me, I get annoyed. I get, if not angry, at somebody hitting me, and I'm unprepared for it. But generally, very few things. That's the exception that proves the rule, because very few things really come along where you go like, oh, I'm just gonna get, something happens. I go, I think I'm not gonna care about that anymore. And before we sign off, let me use these guys as an example, because I'm behind the scenes with them, and I really have a high level of admiration of how they conduct themselves in this current sphere, especially if we're going to bring it back to like creator-owned comics. There's these guys that I work with at Iconic, Tim Lim, Mark Pellegrini, and Doug Ernst, right? And there are times when they can be under an onslaught, a deluge of negative social media feedback, right? And for whatever reason, I don't want to get into the details of like why people are like pointing at them going like, hey, these guys are jerks, these guys are whatever the claims are against them. I'm in sort of in conversations with them. And oftentimes, I mean, if not almost exclusively, they're like, that's interesting, that's pretty funny, we'll discuss it with, for a few, that's funny, that's interesting, that's ridiculous, blah. But at the end of the day, to just get to work. And that, to me, being in that company, and I was talking about this when we first started recording, which is you put yourself in the company of people who establish a high bar of what you believe good conduct is, you know? And these guys do that. These guys show up.
That's awesome.
People say, you know, people like, it's the typical, what do you call it? It's the typical ratio. 99% of people really, really love this stuff that they put out. Huge fans across the board, constantly growing their brand, constantly growing their books. They are in a momentum that I believe to be like the high bar of what it means to be in this creator-owned, crowdfunded space, right? And then, but there's the 1%, there's the 2% that come out of the woodwork to say like, oh, this work isn't very good. You guys aren't delivering my books, blah, 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 taking offense at every little thing and helping to highlight it. But instead of focusing on those 2%, they do the thing where they go like, those freaking 98% of the guys are the ones that we really want to champion. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for continuing to support our books, our line, and us as a collective. You know, yes. we want to live up to our external promise to you guys that we said the books that we're reading right now aren't the books that we really particularly like. We have the means and the opportunity to do something about it, right? And so we're going to go do something about it, and we're trying to live up to that promise to you. Thank you so much. Thank you for sticking around, you know, and thank you for spreading the word, right?
And to that, everyone, go ahead.
I was going to say that is a choice.
Exactly.
That is a choice where they can go like, wait, we can go and get negative. We can
it's also very real because, and what I was going to say is to everyone out there, never mistake the loud voices in the internet for the majority.
Sure.
Because they are not.
They're not. The majority actually don't say anything. And I suspect the majority are the internet just to keep up with whatever it is that you're putting out so they can be looped in, but they don't necessarily say anything. It just seems like this overwhelming minority makes their business to be as overwhelming as possible. But the great thing about these guys is that they understand the freaking combination. You know what I mean? Yeah. They understand the game where they go like, what if we listen to these guys, it'll seem like that we're not doing. And I think this goes back to what you're saying. If we listen to these guys, it seems like we're doing a shit job at living up to the promise that we told everybody. But what these guys have is a point of reference. They step back and go, if we are doing a shitty job, there's 8 volumes of our work that says otherwise.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? If you're telling me that I'm not doing my job well, that I'm not living up to the promise, but the work that's sitting on the shelves, the fact that we have 8 in Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini's case, have 8 volumes of this stuff on the shelves ready to go out to ongoing fans, to new fans that they're picking up. That says something else. It says something that when Doug Ernst is looking at, you know, the feedback that he's getting from the hardcore fans of his books, and rather than going like, I can either address this 3%, this 2%, or I can go live up to the promise of the 98%. And I think that's what I meant earlier when I say like, surround yourself with the people that help you establish and continue to reestablish what the high bar and what good looks like.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's it. I'm going to hit this outgoing bumper, and then thanks to everybody. I'm going to put all the what do you call it? The audio books in the description.
Yeah.
If you guys really, any takeaways from what our conversation is today, we'd love to hear back from you. So leave it in the comments.
Always. Yes.
Shawn is good to get back to you. I don't know what the comment section look like. So thanks ahead of time.
Comments. People are loving it. I respond to all comments on all platforms.
All right.
Yeah. And we're getting some good interactions.
That's amazing. All right. Here's 30 seconds of this outro that it's like visual laxative. I'm gonna go poop right after. 1, 2, 3.
This is the INKPULP podcast. This is the INKPULP podcast. Comics, hip hop, life.
Hey, there we go. I'm going to stop